Today we begin our journey with the MERN Stack, arguably the most popular stack for building a full-stack web application. Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we begin building a complete MERN Stack application. I'll provide links to example source code and all resources in the description below. What is the MERN Stack? MERN is an acronym that uses the first letter of 4 complementary technologies. M is for MongoDB, E is for Express.js, R is for React, and N is for Node.js. So if the MERN stack is full stack, that leads us to ask, what is full stack, and why is the MERN stack considered to be full stack? A full stack application means it requires code that runs on the server and code that runs in the browser. The code that runs on the server is referred to as the backend, and the code that runs in the browser is referred to as the front end. The front end and the backend are typically 2 completely separate code repositories. In a large enterprise full stack project, there may be a team of developers that work on the front end and another separate team of developers that work on the back end. As a full stack developer, you should be able to work on both the front end and the back end if needed. The backend for the MERN stack is a REST API. A REST API, also known as a RESTful API, is an interface that 2 computer systems use to exchange information securely over the internet. The backend will receive requests from the front end. Those requests can be classified as CRUD operations. CRUD is another 4-letter acronym like MERN. The letters of CRUD stand for create, read, update, and delete. These terms also indicate which type of HTTP request methods will be used in the application. For example, POST relates to create, GET relates to read, patch and put requests relate to update, and delete has an exact match. Hopefully, all of that information was not only an intro, but also somewhat of a review, because this is not a beginner's tutorial series. I already have many beginner's courses available, and I recommend those courses as prerequisites to this series if you have not already completed them. Specifically, I suggest my Node.js course before the first lessons of this MERN series, where we're going to build the backend REST API. I also suggest completing my React course, my Redux course, and my React Login series playlist before the lessons in this course where we build the front-end React app. I'll put links to all of these suggested prerequisites in the description, along with any links to resources and source code for this MERN series. We're going to build a Tech Notes app for a small computer repair shop, specifically Dan D's repair shop. So our stakeholder is Dan D, or full name Dan Davidson, but he goes by Dan D. And this isn't the type of project where I'm going to give you a tour of the full project before we begin. We're more taking a real-world approach here for this project. And to do that, we start by gathering some user stories from our stakeholder, Dan D. I've got VS Code open, and I've already done a preliminary interview with Dan D, our stakeholder for the TechNotes project, and I've come up with 20 user stories that Dan wants. Now, if you've never done an interview for user stories, you need to think that the person you're interviewing with will probably describe what they want as a user, but they're not that technical. So it can be difficult to get those technical requirements out of that interview. And of course, that does take practice. So I definitely wanted to start the project with this just so you can see the highlights that I've organized for this. And we can derive our technical requirements from the descriptions that I have received from Dan D. So the main goal for this application, the first thing Dan told me, is he wants to replace his current sticky note system. He has a small computer repair shop, and right now they use yellow sticky notes to write the problem, and they slap it on the side of the computer or whatever other technology, an iPhone, whatever somebody brings in, and it goes on their shelf. And that's their whole system, and he knows they need to get a better system than that. So that's what this TechNotes program's main goal is to have a local database, something they can refer to, and everybody knows what everybody else is working on, and Dan can manage the whole thing. The second thing he wants is just a public-facing web page with basic contact info. Again, he's from a small town, small computer shop. He doesn't need anything extra for his website. He just basically wants it to be a business card. And we're okay with that because we want to focus on building this back-end application for Dan. Okay, he wants to add an employee login to the Notes app because he doesn't want just anybody to be able to access it. He just wants his employees to access it. And then he wants to provide a welcome page after the login. Thinks that would just be nice to, of course, show the username, maybe the current day, time, and of course, what they have to work on or what's available to them, maybe their current level of the administration, whether they're an employee, a manager. Dan has at least one manager, and then he's the admin, of course. He wants easy navigation. He wants to display the current user and assigned role at any time throughout the application. And then he wants to provide a logout option, of course. He wants to require users to log out or log in at least once per week. So that is a big requirement that we need to think about when it comes to authorization. Again, it's not a public-facing site. It's not a financial site. It doesn't need ultimate security, but he wants some security, but he doesn't want his employees to have to log in all the time either. So we need to think about that with the authorization. He wants to provide a way to remove employee access as soon as possible. Possibly he fires someone and needs to remove that access so they do not disrupt the Notes application. Notes are assigned to specific employees, so everybody has their own responsibility. Notes have a ticket number, title, note body, created and updated dates. Notes are either open or completed. Notes can be employees, managers, or admins. Notes can be deleted by managers and admins only. So that's a consideration when we're applying the roles and permissions of the application. Anyone can create a note because a customer may come in to check in and Dan doesn't know who may be at the counter, but they all need to be able to check in and create a note for a customer. Employees can only view and edit their assigned notes. However, managers and admins can view, edit, and delete all notes. So that's another thing with the roles and permissions. Only managers and admins can access the user settings, and only managers and admins can create new users. And then desktop mode is the most important because that's where they'll be using it, but it should also be available in mobile. Now notice this is a markdown file that I created a checklist in. If you're not that familiar with markdown files, they end with a .md, and that's also what the README files for GitHub are usually created with. Now in Visual Studio Code, I can preview this file by pressing Control, Shift, and the letter V, and we can see this markdown file as it would appear possibly on GitHub or somewhere else. And the nice thing is we can also use it as a check. Well, it's not checking right now. Let me go back, and if we put an X in here, it would check. But then also we can preview this a different way with Control K and then just press the letter V. And now let's look at this, and we have this on the right and the edit on the left. And now if I check this, yes, it does check, and we see the X over here. So you can work with these markdown files within Visual Studio Code, and they're sometimes very useful for checklists. So I just wanted to highlight that fact as well. But those are our user stories, and we'll create our technical requirements from these descriptions. Go ahead and create an empty folder for your backend code for this MERN Stack project for TechNotes. And then if you do not already have it, I sure hope you do, but if you don't, install Node.js from nodejs.org, and you can download that right on the home page. And they have currently, as of the making of this video, 16.16 LTS, which stands for latest, is recommended for most users. Of course, get whatever the most current is. That should give you NPM and Node. I already said I hope you do because, again, this is not for beginners. You might get through today's lesson, but I don't feel like you will be comfortable and get that far if you're an absolute beginner. Go back to that Node.js course if you are. Now, after you've installed Node and NPM, or maybe you already have them, you can control backtick inside of Visual Studio Code, and it should open up a terminal window. You can check your versions as well by typing node-v. It says I have 16.16. I can type npm-v as well because that also installs, and we need that, and it's currently 8.15.1. So today we're going to build the back end, or at least start building the back end REST API for this MERN TechNotes project. And that will use Node, Express, and Mongo. So 3 of the 4 technologies in the stack. So what can we take away from these user stories already? Just the basic general thing that we would need for our server is we need to be able to create notes. And as we mentioned in here, view, which would be read as related to CRUD, edit, and that would be update, delete, and then there's also the ability to create notes as well. So we need to perform all CRUD operations for notes and also for users as we read through that. So we know our basic REST API is going to need to complete the CRUD operations for both notes and for users, and it's eventually going to need to support authentication, although we'll do that last. We want to get the application working first and then apply the authentication as the last step. So we're now ready to get our server up and running in Node.js, and to do that I'm going to once again open up the terminal window with Control and backtick. Then I'm going to type npm init and -y, which will help it avoid all of the questions it usually wants to ask. And we can see some of that being completed here. And after we did that, we get a package JSON file. Now this is where our dependencies will be listed, and I need to install 2 dependencies today. So I just opened up the terminal window again. I had it full screen. But inside of the terminal window to install these dependencies, I'm going to use npm and then type I for install. And then I want to install Express, which is one of our MERN Stack technologies. And then I'll just press enter. And I will let that install, and we should see it listed here as a dependency inside of our package JSON. After that, there's a dev dependency, which is different from a normal dependency because we'll only use it during development. So I'll type npm I for install again, and then I want nodemon, M-O-N at the end, -D, and that makes this a development dependency only. Nodemon will let us run our code, and as soon as we save the changes, it will continue to run our server with those updated changes. So it's very useful. Okay, after we've applied both of those, we should be able to close out the terminal once again. I'm going to scroll to the top of the package JSON, and you can see it probably named your project, whatever you named your folder. Mine's in lesson 1. It's version 1.0.0. That's fine. Let's go ahead and put a description in here and say TechNotes MERN project. After that, we're going to use a server.js file. This is really just kind of preference. Index.js is what it defaults to. And then for scripts, I'm going to go ahead and remove this test script, and instead I'm going to put in a start script. And there I'll have node space server, a comma after that because this is an object. I'm going to type dev, and then I'm going to have nodemon space server. So we'll use nodemon during development, and that's the script that will go ahead and let us start nodemon. One other thing I like to do right at the beginning so I don't forget is create a git ignore file. We haven't initialized git for our repository yet, but we could at any point. And this is .git ignore, and inside of the git ignore we list the node modules because we do not want to send those to GitHub or wherever we might keep our code repository. That is this huge folder here that installed when we added some dependencies, and there's no reason to send that up to the code repository. So we create this git ignore file so it's ignored and not sent along with the other code. Okay, now that we've completed those things, let's create our server.js file. At the top of our server file, we'll define express, and we'll set this equal to require, and we'll just require express right inside of there. Underneath that, we need to define the app. So we'll say const app, set that equal to express, and we'll call express. And then I'm going to define a constant called port. And this will help set what port we are running our server on in development, but also when we deploy it somewhere. So here we'll get a .env port if the place we would deploy it would have a port number saved in the environment variables, then it would grab that. Otherwise, we're going to run it here locally at port 3500. Okay, that's the initial imports. Now let's just tell our app to start listening. So we'll say app dot listen, and then we'll pass in the port, and then we have a function, and in this function we'll say console.log, and we'll go ahead and make a template literal here. We'll say server running on port, and inside of this we can pass in our value for port. Let's go ahead and save our server file. Let's press Control backtick to open up the terminal window again, and now we can type npm run dev, and after I press enter, notice our server has started running. This is the console for Node.js, and it says server running on port 3500. It's not really doing anything. If we sent a request there, we wouldn't have any luck, but the server is up and running with just those few lines of code. Let's not stop there though. Let's go ahead and make our server serve a few bits of information to us. And the first thing we need to do for that is import path from the Node.js system. So there we'll say require path. And after we have path, now we can go ahead and use it here in the body of our server file. And we're going to say app.use, and we're going to listen for the root route, just the slash, which would normally be the root or the index of a web page. And here we'll say express.static, and then we'll use path.join, which is a method of path. And then we have 2 underscores and dir name, which is a global variable that Node.js understands, and it says look inside of the folder that we're in. After that, we'll put a comma and then say look inside of the slash public folder. We're telling Express where to find static files like a CSS file or other resources like an image that we would use on the server. Now if we save this, it won't be able to find that if something was looking for it because we haven't created it. But notice NodeMon went ahead and restarted, and we're still running on port 3500. So now let's go ahead and come over here to the file tree and create that public folder. And inside the public folder, we're going to create a CSS folder. Now normally with our REST API, we're just going to be receiving requests and sending back JSON data that would be requested, and we'll be receiving JSON data. However, a REST API can still have a splash page. It could still also return information about requests that cannot be fulfilled, and so we can at least set that much up as we start. Now inside the CSS folder, you might guess we'll go ahead and create a style.css file. Not being a CSS tutorial, I'm just going to paste in some basic styles here. I'll close the terminal quickly so you can see everything on one screen. We're importing in a Google font. We've got a basic reset and just some styles on the HTML and body. Nothing big, but just a few styles there so we could have something on the splash page for the REST API, or possibly a 404 page when a resource is not found. Let's go back to the server.js now, and let's put in another line of code that says app.use, and we'll once again look at that root route, and now we'll say require, and we're going to look for a routes folder and then a root file. And now we crashed the app, and you can see NodeMon said that because we do not have a routes folder and we required it in the file. So let's go ahead and create that routes folder. And then inside of routes, we're going to need to create a file named root.js. Inside of root, we need to require express again. So we'll say const express, set this equal to require express. Now after that, we need to define a router. So we'll say const router, and we'll set this equal to express.router with a capital R to start the word router. And then we need the path once again. So we'll say const path, and we'll require path from Node.js. And then after we have required those 3 things, we're ready to say router.get. So this would be a GET request that relates directly back to our HTTP methods. And the nice thing about Express and these routes is they recognize regex. So we can use a regex here. And the first thing I'm going to type is the caret, and that says at the beginning of the string only. And then we'll put a slash, and then the $, which says at the end of the string only. So that means this will only match if the requested route is only a slash, and that would be for the root. But then I'm going to put in a pipe, which is an OR for regex. And then I'll have slash index, because maybe they would request more than just the slash as they put that in. And after that, I'm going to have, oh, I put in a quote. That's the reason we're seeing red right now. I want to remove that quote because all of this is going to be inside this string. So the quote comes at the end. But then after the index, here I'm going to make the HTML optional. So they could request just the slash, or maybe just the slash index without the .html, or the user could request the full index.html, which would also work. I got an extra parentheses in there. Let's put the comma there. Then we'll have a request and a response for our function. And then inside the function, we will send a file back. So it'll be response.sendFile. Then we'll say path.join, and we'll use that dir name, directory name, variable that Node.js recognizes. And now we need to tell it where to find the file. And the file is going to be up out of the routes folder, so that's what the 2 dots indicate. And then we're going to tell it to look into a views folder, and then we're going to have it look for the index.html file. And that's quite a bit there, but that should wrap it up. And I need that parentheses there at the end. So there I've got the syntax correct. And we've got our router.get, and it will get the index.html file if it matches any of those 3. We just now need to create the views folder and the index.html file. But before we leave this file, we need to say module.exports and set that equal to router. And now this file is complete. Also notice our server is once again running. NodeMon restarted it as soon as the errors were fixed. And it's not crashing even though we're telling them we have a file that we don't, because nobody's requesting it right now. So we can go ahead and do that. This is not a require. The require is actually what crashed before when the required thing was not available. But now this does not, of course, crash the application. Okay, now we'll go over here to our file tree once again, create a new folder. We'll call this views. And then inside of the views folder, we'll create a new file and call it index.html. I'm going to type an exclamation mark, which is an Emmet abbreviation in VS Code. Then I can press tab and we instantly get the foundation of an HTML page. Here I'm going to replace the title where it says document with TechNotes API. And then inside of the body, I'm just going to use an H1 element and type TechNotes. And then we need to bring in the CSS. So that is a link. Rel is a style sheet. And then the href is going to be set to css/style.css. And then we close out that link tag. And actually, I think I need the slash close. There we go. And after we save that, now it can find this CSS because that is a static public file that we set up earlier with our route back here in the server. So we didn't have to put in the full file path for that. It's just one of those things that's available inside of this public route. Our server is still running. Let's drag VS Code to the left. I'll go to my new tab. We want to go to localhost 3500 and press enter. And there we get our TechNotes homepage at the root. However, we could request something that doesn't exist and we might not get the best results. If I put in /Dave, we just get the basic Express response, cannot get Dave. So let's fix that by going ahead and taking care of basically 404 errors, and those are for resources that are not found. Let's start by creating a 404 page inside of the views since we're already there. So another new file, I'll type 404.html. Again with the Emmet abbreviation to get the foundation here, and we'll just say 404 error, or we could say 404 not found. I think that's a little bit better than error. But then inside of an H1 we'll just say sorry, and then we can put a paragraph as well, and inside the paragraph we'll say the page, or let's say the resource you have requested does not exist. And of course we once again need to bring in the link, and that would be rel equals style sheet and href equals css/style.css, and close that out and save. Let's go back to the server and let's handle anything that's not found. We want to put this after all the other routes, and of course I'll put it before the app listen for this server, but here we'll just say app.all instead of app.use. And now we'll listen for this asterisk, which essentially means all. Everything that reaches it to app.all will be put through this instead of being routed to anything that's above, so that it's the catch-all that goes at the end. So then we'll once again have our request and our response, and we'll have our function now. And the first thing we know is the status is a 404, so we can set that right away, although we're not sending the response yet. And now we can look at the headers from the requests that come in and determine what type of response to send. So we can say if the request has an accepts header that is HTML, then we can base our response on that. So here inside of this if, we'll say res.sendFile, and now this will basically be what we did before to send our index.html, but we're going to send our 404, and of course we have to route to it correctly. So now we're at the server level, so we don't need to go up out of a folder. We're just going to go down into the views folder, and from there we're going to get the 404.html file. After that we can put an else if, and here we could say request.accepts, and let's look for JSON, which would be very common, sent to a REST API. So if there's a JSON request that wasn't routed properly and didn't get stopped by any of the expected routes, this would be the response. We'll say response.json, and now inside of this we'll have a message, and then we'll say 404 not found. Very basic generic message. I guess I was using single quotes before. Control-D to select both of those, switch those to single just to stay consistent. And finally, we'll have our last else that will be sent no matter what if HTML or JSON was not matched in the accepts header. And here we'll say response.type. Text is fairly safe, just about everything can receive text. And we will send, once again, our 404 not found. Now we'll test this out in the browser, and as you might expect, we should get HTML back. So if I'll highlight this and just press enter again, now we get, sorry, the resource you have requested does not exist. So we got our 404 page when it didn't match any of the other routes. We are well on our way to having our REST API up and running for our full stack MERN Stack application. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.